Hola, molt bones. No sóc Brett Anderson, però està aquí darrere. Ara, en un moment, en quan s'anem a parlar del seu llibre, de la seva vida i del que ens deixi parlar. Llavors, bueno, m'agradaria que tots doneu un aplaudiment. Aquí està el senyor Brett Anderson. Hello, sir. Take a seat.
Thank you. Hola. Hola. ¿Qué tal?
Feels like a gig.
It does, yeah. A very civilized gig.
All right. But it's another sold out for you somehow.
Yeah, well, you know, kind of try.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would like to start talking about, you initially wrote the book for your son.
Yes.
And when did you expect him to read it? I mean, were you going to look it in a safe and say, open in 2050 or something? How was it going to be?
I don't know. The whole point was to just sort of, for it to exist, so one day that he can read it if he wants to. Mm-hmm. But the last thing I was going to do was force him to read it. Just read this, you know. That would be kind of, abusive. So I don't know, who knows? Maybe he'll never read it. I guess, you know, when he's 30 or something like that. I don't know, these things take time, don't they? These things take time. It takes time for you to care about these things. Mm. You know, my own father used to sort of talk to me a lot about his family and about his upbringing, and I was like, yeah, Dad, whatever. And now I really wish I'd listened, and I try and remember what he said now, but he's gone, and I can never find those things out. So I thought it'd be really nice to actually write them down for my own son to one day, if he wants to, pick it up. He might never be interested, and that would be fine as well. Mm-hmm. It's not really a vanity reason that I wrote it. It was more of a kind of, I don't know, just so it exists somewhere, you know.
What do we learn more about our parents? What to do or what not to do?
Well, both, of course. You know, I think it's important to realise that your parents are just human beings. Mm-hmm. There's a tendency for all children to believe that their parents are kind of, either sort of superhuman or massively flawed, and the truth is always somewhere in between. You know, you don't want to end up blaming your parents for things that you've messed up in your own life. But on the other hand, you know, they're flawed, and they're just people trying to muddle through in whatever way they can, I think. Mm-hmm. And I know that as a parent myself now, that you make mistakes. It doesn't matter how kind of great a job you think you're going to do as a parent. You think you kind of like, it's very easy to be judgmental about other parents, and it's really hard to get it right. It's really, really hard. It's impossible. It's like life. You make mistakes in life, and sometimes those mistakes are the things that end up being the interesting things, and hopefully those mistakes don't end up harming people. But you know, you just do the best you can.
Even if songs are almost most of the time about yourself, with your experience and your story and everything, how different is writing a book? I mean, at what point you believe, is anyone going to care about it? You know, it's my life worth telling. Yeah. You know, even if I'm a rock star, you know what I mean? But
yeah. Well, I mean, exactly. I didn't really know. I mean, I started the book with the premise that I was going to not write a conventional rock biography. Mm-hmm. That's what I didn't want to do. I was very, very clear about that. The genre of rock biographies, rock autobiographies or whatever, I find them fairly dull, to be honest, with a couple of exceptions. It's the same story. I mean, you know, the story of a band is fairly dull, actually, because it's like kind of describing the life cycle of a frog. It just goes through exactly the same predictable phases. You know, you hear frog spawn, tadpole, froglet, frog, death. You know, with a band, it's a similar kind of thing. It's like struggle, success, excess, disintegration, rebirth, and that's what all bands go through. without fail, ourselves included. So that telling that tale is just it's utterly predictable. So what I wanted to do with Cold Black Mornings, especially, was to sort of write about something other than that. To write about the sort of like to try and write about the start of my life and try and give it a bit of poetry. The book was actually inspired by a Laurie Lee book called Cider with Rosie. That's sort of like a beautiful, I don't know if anyone's read it, it's a beautiful kind of like evocation of a childhood in Gloucestershire in the 1930s or something like that, early 20th century. And the extraordinary thing about it isn't anything particularly that happens or any anecdotes that he tells. It's just the beautiful way in which he tells it. And it inspired me and made me realize that often a book is great, not because of what it says, but the way it says it. And that's what I kind of wanted to do with this book. And I'm not in any way comparing my writing to Laurie Lee's writing, because he was a literary genius, and I'm a singer that's written a book about his life. It's a very different thing. But it kind of inspired me in the same way. It inspired me, it made me realize that if you describe things well enough, you can describe the most boring things, and you can bring them to life. And my life was really boring. You know, the things that happen.
You must see mine.
The things that it still is in lots of ways. You know, it went through a phase of not being boring, but it's kind of like gone boring again, and I'm fine with that. You know, but when I was a young man, when the period that this book covers, my life was incredibly boring. You know, it was sort of like, you know, kind of like the most interesting thing about my day was sort of like watching Blue Peter. You know, but it's about how you describe that mundanity, and it's about giving the boring things a bit of poetry, and that's always been one of my main aims as a writer and as an artist. That my belief is that you can describe the most boring things, and you can give them a reverence, and you can give them a beauty, and you can give them a grace. All of these things, and I've just always wanted to do that, and so that's what I tried to do with this book.
And now we're gonna listen to a song that might remind you of someone who's like a key character.
Would you like some water?
Yeah, cheers, man.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So, who's a key character in the book, I believe, and it's your father?
What, is he here?
Yes.
No. This is your life.
I text him.
Is that the video too?
I like that.
Yeah, it's good. That wouldn't get on MTV, by the way. They do like, no, I'm going to show the Moby video instead. Pardon? Yeah, no, don't worry. Don't worry. Yes, that was Liszt, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Franz Liszt, yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And tell us about your father, because he's a key character. He was some sort of a rock star himself. He was very cultivated. You had huge arguments about music, about everything.
Yeah.
And I would like to know how hard was to nail the character without making him look like a villain. You know what I mean? When he had a strong character and everything.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that was one of them. Actually, to start off this little thread, I should say that the initial idea for the book was actually a book about my dad. That's what I started off wanting to write. I wrote a couple of essays, and they were about my dad, because my dad was such a character and such an extraordinary man, an eccentric, but a very flawed person, like we all are. But his flaws were kind of very public somehow. He was kind of like he was almost like a sort of a star that happened to drive a taxi. He was kind of like a very odd man, and an eccentric and a kind of almost like the sort of person that I'm not sure if the 21st century will necessarily create. He was a sort of a product of his era. He was born in the 40s in the war. He was brought up in India in a very kind of like sort of like imperial kind of like military upbringing. He wasn't educated in a formal sense, but he educated himself. And he drifted from dead-end job to dead-end job, but he was very, very cultured, and he was obsessed with classical music, and he used to go to Liszt's birthplace every couple of years and bring back a piece of soil and wear it in this little sort of file around his neck as a homage to his hero. He did jury service one year, and instead of, he refused to swear on the Bible, and he swore on a biography of Franz Liszt instead. And things like that. He was just an eccentric and an extraordinary man. And I tried in the book very much to capture the sort of extremity of his character, the jagged edges. I hope that I've done him justice. And it's never possible to do anyone complete justice. If he read the description of himself, he'd probably be horrified. He'd probably say, well, I'm not like that at all. I suppose my argument to that is that it's my sketch of him, it's my interpretation of him, it's my impressionistic kind of like collage of him. It's sort of how I see him through a lens. And that's sort of how he's gone down in history now. And again, my sort of defense of that is that I might have stylized him slightly, although I haven't lied about him, but in a funny sort of way, I think one of the beautiful things about writing a memoir is that you keep people's memories alive. And that's really lovely. That there's an element of my dad now that is alive beyond his death. There's an idea that I've heard a few times, that people say that you die twice. You die once when you actually die, and then the second time you die is when the last person who ever remembers you dies. The memory of you dies. And by writing about someone in a book, you're keeping that you're lengthening that process. So, yeah, he was a very complicated man, but you know, in lots of ways, very warm and wonderful and loving. And I've tried to capture the paradoxes within his personality.
You said before that he was very much a product of the 20th century. Now we're like 19 years in the 21st century. Can you tell many differences between 20th century people and 21st century people?
Well, it's a good question. I think you probably will be able to in the future. It's one of those things that you won't be able to until you know. Until you look back on it with retrospect. I think you probably...
That's been your trick in interviews with your songs, you know?
Yeah.
You know, the meaning will come in time, and I'm not going to tell you about the meaning because art's like that, you know?
Yeah. I think you can, you know, already, you know, you look at the young generation and their kind of, sort of, you know, their ability with you know, technology, you know, straight away, you know, the way that they're kind of natives of that land, and the way that people that were born in the 20th century are kind of they're visitors to that land, you know? You know, my stepson is kind of, you know, he knows his way around computers and phones in the way that I don't know, and it's just they're brought up with that, and so straight away there's that kind of like, there's that sort of technical now.
Do you actually care about that? Do you feel like you have to keep up with this kind of stuff? Yeah.
Not at all, no. I don't care. I mean, I don't care personally about sort of being sort of left behind by a wave of technology.
It's a relief.
I'm quite glad about it. I'm quite content to just be in my own little bubble, quite honestly. I hate it when you have to update programs on your computer. It's really annoying. I recently, you know how the computers these days, they kind of update themselves automatically. And my GarageBand, which is how I write music, updated itself, and I can't work it anymore. So I'm in the middle of writing them, and I can't write any bloody songs. I can't use my program. So I'm like an old man. Who cares?
Well, now we're gonna play a song that's quite different from the previous one, and I think it has a different meaning to your story.
A big cheer for the Sex Pistols. Come on, let's hear it.
mean, first of all, I have a Pavlovian response to that in that we use that as intro music for so many years that I'm kind of like, oh, I've got to get ready for a gig now. Kind of like feel as I've got to go on stage and sing. But I mean, the Sex Pistols are the greatest band who ever lived. You know, they're the greatest, and it's amazing when you listen to something like that was made 40, I don't know how many years ago, 40 something.
Many years.
And it still sounds so like it was made 5 minutes ago. It's still so exciting, and that's the power of rock music when it's done right. It's got a timelessness that'll always sound exciting. You hear a great rock record, and it'll always do that thing to you. Always press those buttons.
I guess the intention should be like being so today and also being so tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just being linked to the time you write music, and then just maintain this.
Yeah, I guess I think the thing is if you tap into primal kind of feelings in music, you know, good pop music is about raw emotions. You know, that song is about, I don't know what it's about in a kind of theoretical sense. That's not what I mean, but it's about fucking anger. It's about energy. It's about violence. You know, these sorts of things. Those are simple, animalistic emotions, and those are the kind of emotions that, not necessarily those specific emotions, but you know, I tap into, in my songs, I tap into sadness and fear and passion and hatred and all of these things. You know, I don't sort of sing about kind of, you know, sort of kind of farming in Kenya or something like that. Do you know what I mean? That's not what the point of music is. That's the point of journalism. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And there's one thing I read the other day, that your stepson plays drums, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And you do Anarchy in the UK at home?
And what?
You play Anarchy in the UK at home?
We can play.
And you live in the country, hopefully.
Yeah, we live in, well, yeah.
Neighbours.
There's, no one can hear what we do. In the country, no one can hear you scream, you know, it's sort of like, it's a bit like Alien. But yeah, my stepson plays drums, but my son started to play drums as well now as well, so he was playing the other day. He played in a school concert, which was quite nice. So sometimes we do, because I sometimes play along with him, because he can play very simple beats. He's only 6, he's nearly 7, but I don't really know many other people's songs, really. I kind of know how to play Suede songs, so I was trying to think of the song. So sometimes we play To the Birds, because it's a really simple ding, 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 ding sort of rhythm. So we were playing that the other day, me and a 6-year-old boy playing To the Birds. So, okay.
That's one thing that it appears many times in the book, and I think it's been somehow a key subject in most of your tunes. There is like some sort of quest for allies, for like-minded people, you know, the will to form a gang.
Yes.
To be part of a gang.
Yeah.
It's like that feeling of us against the world. You know, do you still long for that? Do you still feel that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my upbringing has got a lot to do with that. You know, I was brought up in a very strange. You know, the book refers to it a lot. You know, I was brought up in a very poor household, but a household simultaneously that had a lot of culture there. So it wasn't a conventional sort of working class background. It wasn't the sort of like, you know, the kind of like the Hackney Tower block, the mining community. It wasn't that sort of thing. My mum and dad were both my mother was an artist, my father was a classical music obsessive. So basically it meant that I don't think we fitted in to any sort of social situation. We didn't fit in socially in the council estate we lived in. We were seen as aloof and distant, and we didn't fit in with the middle class because we were too poor. You know, my parents' values covertly sort of like aspired towards middle class life. Basically, I never really fitted in, and so I think I've always been looking for my tribe. And I've said this before, but I've said it because it's true. I've always been looking for sort of like-minded people, and the songs I've been writing, you know, things like So Young and, you know, all these songs, We Are the Pigs, he's always looking for my tribe. And I think the ultimate song for that is Trash. And the song Trash
Definitely.
that's the song for me that it was almost like a song about Suede fans and about the band. It was about a kind of identity that somehow described the band and therefore by kind of, you know, the fans as well, sort of thing. And I was always looking for my tribe, I think, yeah.
But on the other hand, you don't seem to feel very comfortable in like crowded rooms. You know what I mean?
I don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, when you say, you know, no, I mean like in chatting. You know, I mean having, with, for example, in the book, when you get along with Bernard is when you get along on your own. You know,
right.
what I mean, when the two of you get along.
Yes.
Not, I mean, like, how much of a group of people do you feel comfortable with?
Oh.
To talk about, to just have it, go out for a drink, you know?
I mean, I've got sort of mild social anxiety. So, you know, not many really. I've had strange relationship with people. You know, I don't
That's
really.
what I was trying to say.
Yeah, it's the weird thing. People sort of assume that because I go on stage and kind of can project to lots of people, that I'll be some sort of brilliant kind of like social communicator, and I'm not really like that. I sort of sit in the corner, and I like the company of people I know really well. Mm-hmm. I have very, very close friends. Only a few of them, though. I have a kind of collection. I've got sort of 5 very, very close friends, and I have my family, and those are the people that I really open up to and I like spending time with. People that I don't know so well, people that I can't be bothered to be nice to people at dinner parties. It kind of bores me. You know, I find that sort of social situation odd. But I like groups of people because I like all of you. Though. No, but it's a funny dynamic because you kind of like you're kind of like a group of people. It's kind of group dynamics, isn't it? You kind of it's a different sort of thing. This group of people are almost like one. I don't mean to say that you're all one because you're not. You're all individuals. I don't know, I'm digging myself into a hole.
Sorry about I didn't mean to put you in that position. Sorry about that.
I'm just digging my own grave here, aren't I? I'll shut up.
And now we're gonna see something, a pattern in the screen, and which is like, I guess it's something similar to wallpaper, you know?
I'm looking at that, man. Yes, it's William
Morris thing.
Wallpaper, yeah.
And
yeah.
does it bring you some memories of the place you live?
It does. The whole house kind of was filled with sort of William Morris things and kind of fin de siècle kind of like sort of imagery and Aubrey Beardsley prints and these sorts of things, which was sort of my mother's kind of, you know, thing. She was into all that sort of Victoriana and Edwardian stuff. Yeah, very kind of elegant. It's beautiful. I mean, it's still very, very powerful, beautiful imagery. It reminds me of our bathroom in our little council house in Haywards Heath, because it was a tiny little bathroom the size of this table, and it was kind of had red honeysuckle William Morris wallpaper, which was very evocative. Yeah.
It was a peculiar home somehow, because it was like small but the pretension, the intention in the furniture and the vibe and everything was beyond.
Yes.
Its own nature somehow, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. It was a sort of tiny little council house, and it's kind of unusual because there's lots of sort of like kind of cultural stuff. And my dad made all the furniture. He was quite handy. He was a really good handyman. He always used to despair of me. I used to kind of like have to kind of like hold the wood while he sawed it and stuff like that. And he was always like, "What's going to become of you, boy? You're useless. You can't." Because I wasn't very practical, and I'm still not actually. I'm terrible.
Go form a band.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, I just can't be bothered, you know. But yeah, it's a tiny little house, and my dad was he was a very. In lots of ways, he was quite scary. He was quite he was never physically abusive towards me, but he was kind of quite intimidating. When he was in a kind of like, he was quite moody, and when he was in a mood, it was quite an intimidating presence. You could feel the atmosphere was very, very thick. You could almost like cut it with a knife kind of thing. And I think it's probably made me quite neurotic, that kind of presence.
How do you recall like your first encounters with like posh people? I mean, people, I mean, did they feel like aliens to you? Their upbringing, their, everything is like, can I touch you?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the thing, I suppose. It's not like, I'd never met anyone posh before I went to university, because I lived in Sussex. This is a weird kind of contradiction. It's like I didn't live in a mining community or in Hackney or anything like that. I lived in a weird little council house on the edge of a sort of pretty little village. So it didn't fit into any particular category. So I sort of had met people that not posh people. I didn't kind of hang out with landed gentry, but I did sort of mix with people that weren't as kind of like abjectly poor as we were. But I suppose the first people that I met, that were worldly and moneyed and all of those things, people like Justine was at university, and that was it's interesting meeting people that aren't from exactly the same background as you. I think it's
You went on a city planning course.
Yeah.
What happened to you? What did you hit your head with?
I know. I wish I'd carried on with that. Actually, that would have been really good. Yeah. No, not really. I don't really know why I decided to do town and country planning. It was a strange choice. Yeah. Kind of ridiculous.
And you moved to architecture as well.
You don't really know at that age, do you? It's this incredible thing when you're 17 or whatever, and you're expected to make these incredibly important, pivotal, life-changing decisions about your life, and you're not even fully formed mentally at that age. There's lots of evidence to suggest that we don't actually become mature mentally until we're 25. It's the frontal lobe or something like that doesn't mature in the brain until you're in the mid-20s, and you're forced to make these decisions. I don't know why the hell I wanted to do town and country planning. It's this absolutely bizarre, but you just sort of muddle through, and then I kind of gave it up and went and did an architecture course in London. But I wasn't planning to be an architect. I was just sort of like, I was just wasting time. I was lucky enough to go to university at a time when you used to get grants, so I didn't have to have a loan to pay or anything like that. So you could go to university in the UK and just go there and just basically sit around and do nothing, and it was great for 3 years.
I've been doing that for 20 years. That's
yeah,
good,
I tried to extend it. So.
Thing is like, there's a point in the book when someone comes and listens to your first songs and tells you to hurry up, and you're 22.
Yes.
And it feels like, okay, come on, you just have to make it now. But you're only 22.
Yes, yeah.
How did you feel at the time? And if you look back, you think, okay, we're only 22. We didn't need to.
Yeah. No,
things.
But it was Bernard that said that, actually. Bernard said, well, the first time we met him, because he's a couple of years younger than us, and he's kind of like, I think he's like, 3 years younger than me or something. Anyway, but I think at that, we were a bit long in the tooth. We were a bit old to be, to be still sitting there in bedrooms. Because lots of bands get going when they're quite young. Lots of great artists, are already kind of making their best work when they're in their early 20s. We were still kind of very much at the start of the whole process. We didn't start writing good songs until, God, like 1991 or something like that, 1992 sort of thing. So it's a funny thing. I think that's why young bands, when they are really good, it's so exciting, because they're still kids in lots of ways. They're not adults yet. You're in your 20s, you're still a kid. You're still, your brain's still forming, and so all these kind of mad ideas splurge out onto the page, and you use that energy as something.
When you read that music press cliche about this, they came fully formed. What do you think about that? When you see a new band,
When they came fully formed.
Yeah. Do you think that's possible?
No, I don't really think it's possible. I mean, it certainly wasn't for us. We spent years and years struggling. Well, that's what this book is. The second half of the book is about. It's about the struggle that no one sees. Well, one or two people saw, but they were kind of like, probably not very impressed. It's part of the kind of process of becoming any good as a band. It's not very nice. you have to sort of play many gigs in front of sort of like 2 people that don't give a shit. But it's kind of like part of the process. It's kind of like, it used to be called paying your dues. I don't know if it's still called that, but it's kind of like, it's sort of part of it. No bands just arrive fully formed. It's just, you know.
It's a cliche somehow.
You got to learn. You got to learn. You got to learn what you're doing. You know, you got to learn how to do it. Look at any band; they've all been through a kind of like a sort of formation phase. Any artist, any band is necessary. You're still learning kind of who you are. You're still piecing together the fragments of your persona. You know.
Why do you believe you kept going through all the years that you knew that the band didn't quite work? You know what I mean? Even if it's like they were like you've been kicked around and everything. How did you keep going?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know, because it wasn't through any kind of natural ability. You know, this is what I often ask myself that question. I'm not a particularly gifted musician. I'm not especially naturally musical. I'm not an especially kind of like gifted storyteller. But I just don't give up with anything. When I want to do something, I'm quite determined about it, and I applied that sort of like bloody-mindedness to being in a band, and I'm really glad I did. You know, I just didn't give up, and that's the same ethos that I've always had. At, you know, every stage when Suede had been faced with a crisis, I've kind of just pushed through it, I suppose.
Somehow, through some I should send you to Brussels to discuss things.
Send me to Brussels to sort out Brexit. Yeah. I can give it a go. Yeah.
Think about that. How was being linked to the School Britannia thing and being part of a Britpop thing and all that? You've been one of the most renegade people towards that. And when you think about that, what do you think about now?
Well, I'm not a fan of the Britpop movement, as everyone knows. I actually think it's, you know, looking back on it, it's actually a bit of a joke. I can't believe that anyone actually takes any of those bands seriously anymore. I really can't. I think that most of them are terrible. I mean, they're so misogynistic. There was such a deep-seated vein of misogyny and nationalism. And I can't believe that anyone still takes those bands seriously. I think they sound that now their whole message sounds so old-fashioned. It sounds as old-fashioned as you know, 70s DJs or something like that. It sounds like it's from a different time. What I am really proud of is that Suede, even in those days, even when the tide of misogyny and laddishness was sweeping everyone else along, we stood firm, and we stood up. We kind of like, you know, we had a very, very different message, a message of fluid sexuality. That was our message. That was what the androgynous message, and we stood firm in that. I'm very proud that we did stand firm there. Looking back on it, I think we were right. As John Peel once said about prog rock music, I'm right now and I was right then. And that's how I feel about our message in the 90s. And I think history is validating us now.
Yeah, but basically now, and the message would come across easily now. They would be better understood now. We live in a non-binary world.
Yes, exactly.
Gender is more important than sex. You know what I mean? It would come across easily now.
Of course it is. And you know, what I was trying to get across in the songs, strangely enough, it sounds quite paradoxical, but by kind of like, I was trying to blur the lines with sexuality, and therefore I was trying to come across as an emotional being rather than a sexual being. And that's what I was trying to write the songs. I was trying to write the songs, they were emotional songs, even though they were sexual at the same time. It's a strange paradox, but I wasn't interested in defining myself through sexuality.
That feminine thing, had it anything to do with like the loss of mom and sister and everything, the loss of like feminine figures in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, there was a sort of femininity to the style that I explained in the book, was very much about an expression of grief. It was about trying to find a sort of like a feminine element within myself that didn't exist in my life because of the loss of my mother and you know, being single and all of these things. So yeah, it was a twisted kind of slightly kind of like cartoon vision of femininity that I was reaching for, I think.
Speaking of your mother, we got like a drawing, like the area where.
What's that?
Has it any resembled to things she drew?
That's not one of her paintings. That looks like Constable or something like that. I don't know what it is. Is it?
I believe so. I think so, yeah.
No, I don't know who that is. Anyway.
I believe so, yeah.
Well, it's a landscape. Yeah.
What do you think? What does it bring to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's very nice.
It's very green.
It's very green?
Yeah. I think there's some animals down there as well.
What's the point of this again?
I don't quite remember, actually.
Yeah.
Do you like it?
Yeah, I love it. Shall we move on?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay.
How has your relationship with like the press and the things you feel like talking since you released the book? I mean, do you feel more comfortable talking about things than you used to at some point in the past?
I do, in lots of ways. I feel as though really kind of the whole process of writing the book and doing things like this actually has kind of like unlocked something in me. I feel much more like I can communicate things that I couldn't before. I suppose I feel confident about talking about things like this. But there'll always be a point where I'll shut down with these things. It's a really interesting dance that you have to do as an artist. You know, the last album that Suede made, in fact, the last two albums that we made have been about my son, effectively. Yeah? And that's really interesting, because I can't say that these albums are about my son without, at the same time, giving some details there. I can't just sort of say they're about my son, but I'm not going to talk about it, because I'm aware that's sort of like, well, then don't say that it's about, you know, I've got it. But there's a point beyond which that I have to judge, and that's just my own personal judgment, where I have to say, well, no, that's private, and I'm allowed to, I'm happy talking about this, and I'm not happy talking about that. And I don't know why that is. There's no logic to it. It's just a feeling. It's an instinct. And the same goes for when I was writing this book, actually. There are things in it that I left unsaid. And in lots of ways, it's very explicit. But in lots of ways, it just says, the door closes, and I'm not going to talk about that, because I'm not comfortable with talking about that. And I think that's totally fine. I'm allowed to do that as a writer. You know, you make those decisions as a writer. Everyone edits their lives. You know, it happens every day. You don't tell people the gory details of your life. You tell them the side of you present the side of you that you somehow want other people to hear. It's not. There's nothing fake about it. It's just what we all do. Some things we're not comfortable with talking about, so we don't. Everyone has it's on a spectrum. Everyone has their boundaries. Everyone has their limits. Some people want to be explicit about their life. Some people don't. You just have to make those choices.
And that's also one thing about the book, that it's generous. It's not vindicative. It's not revenge.
Yeah.
There's no hard feelings somehow. Was that the idea from day one? Or, you know, to not to write this kind of like, I'm going to take revenge on this and this and this, and I'm just going to kick your ass.
I just think when you read those books, that when people have done that, you just sort of like feel like tapping them on the head and going, there. It's sort of like, oh, come on, you know? It's like, if you're writing a book about it, I wanted to be able to sleep at night. You know, after writing this book. That was a really important thing for me. You know, I'm 51 now.
Same here.
I don't sleep so well as I used to. I don't need more things keeping me awake at night. So,
have you heard of pills? There are some pills there that
lots
help
of
you.
pills, so I wanted to sleep at night. The last thing I don't want to slag people off. It's, you know, it comes. If I was still resenting people 25 years later for things they've done a quarter of a century ago, you know, one of the things that you realise when you're writing a memoir is that no one's to blame for anything. The shit just happens. Do you know what I mean? It's like this. We were all young. One of the things which I talk about in the next book, which is out this year.
October, I think, here. Yeah.
I'm just a little plug for it, though. You see, it's quite clever. I have to talk about when Bernard left the band. You know, it's a thing that happened. I can't pretend it didn't happen. You know, I can't kind of skirt around it in a sort of Stalinistic way and erase it from history. It happened. But the last thing I'm going to do is sort of point a finger and sort of blame. So it's just like shit happens. You know, we were young and out of control, and there's no one to blame for these things. It's just unfortunate, but these things happen.
So I assume that after releasing the book, no one called you and said, "Okay, you bloody."
Well, I mean, the only sort of no friends, no band members, anything like that. They were fine with it, you know. I mean, I had long email conversations with Justine about it. She initially really liked the book, and then I had a long email from her about it, saying that she felt on reading it again that I'd sort of been simplistic about her upbringing, about you know, painting her as this sort of rich girl and me being the kind of like working class hero, and it was a very simplistic dynamic, and I had to defend that and blah blah blah. So but it was a civilized conversation. It wasn't a we didn't fall out about it. My sister had a couple of issues about how I portrayed my dad, because she didn't remember him quite like that. Things like that, and I had to point out to her, well, that's just perspective. That's just, you know, there's no such thing as truth. It's sort of like, it's just how we see things. It's just perspectives, you know.
Did you change anything after these conversations or emails? Did you?
No, I didn't. You know, apart from my sister giving me some sort of actual facts about stuff before I was born, I couldn't remember. I didn't consult anyone. The last thing I wanted to do was kind of write a book and then kind of send it off to people and say, what do you think of this? And can I, you know, I was like, this is what I'm doing. Trust me. I'm not going to be slagging you off. Please just accept that this is what I'm doing. And I sent it to them when it was finished.
Okay. Now we're going to see some images there. I hope they are as successful as the landscape we saw before, because we nailed it. And
Okay.
And we like successing again and again.
That's
okay.
I
think that's you.
I look like a sort of puffy dog there.
You know, we picked that because I think that's. I would like you to tell me
Why
about.
Why did you pick that picture?
Listen, yeah, just everything at the end makes
lots
sense.
of better pictures.
Everything at the end makes sense. You should be patient.
Okay.
Please. I would like you to tell me about the character called Brat.
Yes.
Do you know who he is?
Sometimes, yeah. I don't know.
Because I mean, it's a French magazine. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
know. And I would like. Probably Brad did this interview, didn't he?
Practiced interviews?
No, Brad did this interview.
Oh, Brad. Oh,
yeah.
Matt.
Matt
oh,
Brad,
sorry,
yeah.
Yes.
Could you tell your audience who Brad is?
Yes. We're not signed to this record company anymore, so they can't kind of like wrap us over the knuckles. But in the early days, we had to do so many interviews, and so many phone-ins specifically, phone interviews, that is. And I didn't have time to do them or couldn't be bothered. So Matt used to impersonate me. And so most of the foreign interviews that you read that are interviews with me are actually interviews with Matt. And we used to call the character Brat, because it's a combination of Brat and Matt. So.
Did he ever got into trouble?
He did. We once had a gig in Canada or something like that, and he kind of like slagged off the Bare Naked Ladies. Do you remember them? There's some band. I can't remember who they were.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, and they came to our gig and they wanted to beat the shit out of me for slagging them off, and I was kind of like, thanks, Matt, you know. So.
How important is Matt in the story?
How important is Matt?
How important, yeah. Because I believe he's a key character somehow.
How important is Matt?
Yeah.
Yeah, really important. I mean, he still is. He's a very kind of key member of the band. You know, our relationship. You know, we started the band together. We kind of laid down the foundations for the sort of idea. We were always very theoretical in the early days. We weren't very musical. We were kind of rubbish at music, but we were quite good. We had big ideas, and our ideas way outstripped our musical ability. And it wasn't until Bernard came along and showed us actually how to play that we thought, oh, we better actually get better at what we're doing, sort of thing. And you know, But yeah, Matt is, you know, he's my old friend, and he's a dear friend, and it's, you know, it's kind of, it's interesting how your relationship goes through so many different phases. We're very different together now than we were 30 years ago, but it's still, you know, it's still there's still a germ of those people still left, you know.
Is sometimes thinking about being in a band more fun than actually being in a band?
No, it's great being in a band.
All the time.
No. Well, it depends when, you know. No, I mean, it's like life. Being in a band is like sort of like life, but kind of magnified, sort of thing. So
Big Brother.
The kind of, you know, the kind of highs. It's like kind of like a cartoon version of life. You know, the kind of like, it's like sort of like life through some sort of like weird kind of lens, making the colours much more vivid. It's sort of magnified. So the highs are kind of really high, and the lows are pretty fucking depressing. So you know, you have to ask on whatever day that, you know, being in a band can be amazing or it can be fucking awful. It's not great sitting in airports and sitting backstage and stuff like that. People think backstage is this sort of like kind of like cavalcade of kind of dwarfs holding trays of cocaine and sort of like naked burlesque kind of like women, you know. It's sort of like people sort of sitting around cheese platters and kind of, you know, kind of cold cups of tea and stuff like that. It's sort of, yeah.
That's a part in the book when you go to the Brit Awards and you see all these big stars and everything. And have you ever had the ambition to become that huge, to be that big star, to be that? Really?
Yeah, we tried all the time. You know, we just didn't ever quite achieve it. No, I'm quite glad we didn't in lots of ways, actually. And I've always sort of, you know, I always thought when we were, you know, young, I always thought Suede were going to be the biggest band in the world. Seriously, I didn't think I didn't want to be an indie band. I didn't want to be, you know, I didn't write songs for sort of small, you know, tiny audiences. I didn't want to play in pubs all our life. I wanted to be huge. I was seriously ambitious. All the songs I wrote in the early days especially were all written as they were intended to be kind of like global number ones. But it's just my head's not like Mariah Carey's head, so they came out slightly different. I'm kind of quite glad about that.
Only your head, yeah.
I'm quite glad about that now. You know, but they were all intended, they were very sort of, you know, they're supposed to be big pop hits, you know. They're not supposed to be kind of, you know, odd little songs.
And isn't it somehow some kind of relief when nowadays you release an album and you realize that being number one doesn't mean what it used to? That you just carry on and have your own audience and do your things and not caring as much as...
Yeah, I mean, there's a freedom in that. I mean, the mainstream is... I don't even know what the mainstream is anymore, to be honest. I'm so confused about where the mainstream is. I don't really know how people judge that anymore, because there simply aren't the forums to judge that anymore. We don't have charts in the same way. Okay, so we have sort of album charts or whatever. It's a different kind of thing. We don't have the same kind of media that we used to have. So there's a freedom to that. There's freedom to being in a band that has a very, very loyal fan base and that supports the band, which is a wonderful thing, and allows us to make interesting records, because that's sort of, I think that's what people want us to do. They don't want us to sort of like try and be some sort of, you know, they don't want us to try and make chart music, because that media infrastructure isn't there for us anymore. And I'm fine with that. You know, it's impossible for Suede to have it. Even if we wrote the greatest song we've ever written, it wouldn't be a hit now, because it's simply, there's not that media infrastructure for us anymore. And that's fine. I don't need that anymore. I don't need that sort of that kind of, I'm not interested in that chase anymore. I'm interested in pushing it somewhere artistically into an unusual place. So that freedom's wonderful, actually, yeah.
When you reach a certain point in your career, how do you deal with nostalgia? What's your approach?
What's my approach to
how do you feel? Do you feel nostalgic?
I don't feel particularly nostalgic about my career ever. I feel nostalgic about, you know, personal stuff, but I never sort of like, very rarely, you know, in a kind of nice way. You know, there's sort of nice little memories pop up, sort of thing. You know, but I don't sort of feel. No, I don't. It's more of a personal thing I feel I have nostalgia for.
How's like living in the country for you? I couldn't imagine.
It depends what time of year you ask me that, really. You know, in kind of in the winter, it's not so good, you know. But it's quite good. In the summer, it's amazing. It's beautiful. In the winter, I'm very, very productive because there's not much else to do. So I've written a lot in the last 3 years, and it's all been in the winter. Put it that way. As soon as the sun comes out, I want to sit by the swimming pool and have a beer. You know.
No gardening, nothing like that. No.
No. My wife really does gardening, and I just sort of sit there and kind of go, yeah, why don't you move that over there? And she's like pushing this wheelbarrow, and she doesn't mind.
That's one thing about, like, especially at the beginning of the book, like some feeling of like a nuclear collapse. You know what I mean? Do you have a feeling of a nuclear war coming? And a few of the songs at the beginning have the plenty of nuclear skies and things like that. When did you stop worrying about the nuclear apocalypse?
1983.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Me too.
No, I don't know. There was a thing in the early 80s. It was a very, very present kind of like that. There was a sort of like a sort of this miasma of threat in the early 80s. There was loads of every newspaper you opened, because it was in the middle of the Cold War, and there was the threat from Russia and all of that sort of thing. And so I remember that being very much part of my childhood kind of thing. But I slightly miss my neurosis about nuclear war. I kind of like I turned that into. I have to be neurotic about something, and I feel,
Facebook.
I feel lonely if I don't have a neurosis. So what I did was I took my neurosis and I applied it to my family, and the last sort of like couple of albums have been about my fear about my family. So I need a nice cozy neurosis to keep me awake at night. Yeah, I mean, you know, what else are you going to do? You know, I can't really. I don't think that the state of happiness. I think it's an illusion. I think we need to. I think it's fleeting, and it's good to be worried about things.
Just last question, because I think we're past time. Could you tell us what are you best at?
What?
What are you best at?
What am I best
What do you
at?
best?
Well, hopefully I'm kind of best at what I do. But
Come on. Just go the extra mile.
oh,
Go.
God, I don't quite know what you mean. Well, I'm quite good at juggling. Yeah? No? I don't know. It's a really difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because you can't say that you're best at something. It's like sort of like, you know, that has to be someone else saying that. It's an invalid judgment, isn't it?
We'll pass beyond that.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
It's kind of like it doesn't mean anything. It's me saying that I'm the best at this or best at that. That sounds like one of those bands that kind of like go on about how great they are or something. Do you know what I mean? It's completely meaningless.
Yeah.
You know, it's not an objective judgment.
You're not an Oasis, are you?
Not the last time I looked.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are we doing some questions?
Any questions?
No?
Anyone?
I like some questions from the crowd. It's fun. Hello.
Hi, Brit.
Hello.
Thank you for being here
Thank
with
you for
us.
coming.
Thank you for your music. For
Thank you.
making us happy with your music. In the book, you know, going back to the Brit Awards, where you said you were with Cher and Peter Gabriel, and you felt like an outsider. Do you still feel like that? After, you know, so many years, you're still successful, you're being a best-selling author right now. Do you still feel like there's something in you doesn't belong there where you are?
Do I still feel like an outsider
Yes.
in those circles? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of do, really. It might sound weird to people that are genuine outsiders, because obviously I'm kind of not. I'm aware of that paradox, but I do. I don't feel particularly accepted by the music industry, and I'm quite happy with that position. I feel as though my voice is still quite fresh. I'm not one of those artists that every time we release a record, everyone kind of like says it's absolutely brilliant, even though it's a piece of shit, which some bands get away with. They do. You know, people are very happy to be very objective about Suede. And I think that's probably quite good, because it means that it keeps us on our toes. I don't think that we've entered that kind of thing where we can just coast, and that's a good thing. And I never feel particularly comfortable within the kind of like the cozy, back-slapping environs of the music industry, no. I think that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.